All right. Federal immigration enforcement is expanding. Courts are reinforcing federal authority. Local resistance is growing. And protests are escalating. Here's the tension. Underneath all of it, power can be exercised legally and still lose legitimacy. And when enforcement moves forward while trust collapses, that gap becomes the instability everyone feels but nobody quite knows how to name. This isn't about one policy. It's about one administration. It's even about it's, it isn't even about immigration specifically. It's about what happens when authority keeps moving and belief in systems starts slipping right out from under it. Now, it's my turn. We're in a moment where everything feels heavier, not because the rules suddenly change, but because fewer people believe the rules are being applied with them in mind. Authority without trust doesn't feel neutral. It feels personal. It feels aggressive, even when it isn't. And once that feeling sets in, everything gets filtered differently. Context gets replaced by suspicion. Process gets replaced by emotion. Observation gets replaced by narrative. That's the environment, right? That's the environment right now. Not chaos, tension, not collapse, instability, the quiet kind. The kind that bullets pressure slowly. Builds pressure slowly, invisibly, until one day it releases somewhere unexpected. This is The Turn, and I'm Robert Peel. Now let's talk about what's actually happening. What you're watching right now isn't disorder. It is authority being exercised while legitimacy keeps slipping. At home, federal immigration enforcement expands. Courts don't stop it. Federal authority overrides local resistance. That's not opinion, that's observational reality. Legally, the system is doing what it is allowed to do, but that's not how it's being experienced. And that difference matters more than most people want to admit. Because the public conversation isn't about jurisdiction or statute, it's about emotion, humanitarian framing, images, stories, fear. Here's the crack in the foundation. Authority can be perfectly legal and still feel legitimate to the people watching it happen. Security versus humanity, law versus moral framing, process replaced by optics. And that gap between enforcement and trust is where instability lives. It doesn't stop at the border. Zoom out. Internationally, the tone changes completely. Trade realignments, strategic partnerships, calm language, measured posture, negotiation up front, pressure in the background. The public message is stability, control, competence. Everything is under control. But notice the contrast. Abroad, power speaks softly. At home, power enforces loudly. Same authority, different audience, different tone, which tells you something important doesn't operate on principle alone. It operates on perception. Now, look at the institutions that never quite leave the headlines, the scandals that resurface, the outrage that reignites, the accountability that never quite arrives. Same cycle every time. Attention, anger, moral certainty, then nothing. Institutions don't lose authority when this happens. They lose trust, slowly, quietly, repeatedly. And when trust erodes authority, compensates. It gets louder, more rigid, more defense, because authority without legitimacy has to keep reminding you who's in charge. So when you really step back, not emotionally, not politically, just observationally, the pattern becomes obvious. At the border, on the world stage, inside legacy institutions, authority is being exercised correctly. Legitimacy is being received poorly. And when those two drift apart, societies don't just argue, they fracture. That's why everything feels tighter, louder, closer to the edge, and we're just getting started. Here's the thing that nobody knows how to say without getting shouted down. A lot of what's happening right now is technically legal, and yet almost nobody feels reassured. That's new. For a long time, legality was supposed to calm people down. It meant there were rules, limits, guardrails. It meant someone had thought this through. Now, when people hear it's legal, they don't relax, they hesitate. Because legality used to signal fairness. Now it often signals distance. Distance from the people affected, distance from accountability, distance from common sense. This isn't because people suddenly became unreasonable. It's because relationship between authority and trust changed. Authority used to work like this. Rules existed and trust followed. Now it works like this. Rules exist and trust is expected. The reversal matters because when trust comes after enforcement instead of before it, order stops feeling stabilizing and starts feeling imposed. Watch how institutions explain themselves now, not just governments at all large systems. They don't start with standards, they start with stories. Stories about intent, stories about context, stories about why this had to happen. Because standards invite evaluation, stories invite belief, and belief is easier to manage than agreement. That's why morality doesn't sound like rules anymore, it sounds like narratives. Instead of, this is the rule and here's why it applies evenly, we get, here's how this should make you feel. When morality lives in standards, people argue about application. When morality lives in stories, people argue about reality itself. That's how you end up with the same event, the same facts, the same footage, producing completely different moral conclusions. And both sides are convinced that they're right. Institutions see this fracture. They're not blind to it. And here's the paradox they're stuck in. They want obedience because systems need coordinations, but they also want legitimacy because force alone doesn't scale. So try to get both at the same time. That's why that's where optics come in. If you can rebuild trust fast enough, you manage perception instead. You perform transparency. You perform empathy. You perform accountability because performance is faster than repair. But performance has a shelf life. Every time optics replace trust, next explanation has to work harder. The next justification gets louder. The next story has to be more emotionally convincing until legality stops feeling like order and starts feeling like enforcement. This is what people are reacting to, even if they can't articulate it. They're not just rejecting rules, they're rejecting to rule by distance. They're not anti authority, they're being managed by narratives instead of standards. Trust doesn't vanish overnight, it erodes. And once it's gone, no amount of legality can replace it. Here's the part nobody wants to say out loud. You can enforce behavior faster than you can rebuild trust. And right now, almost every institution keeps choosing the faster option. That works until it doesn't, because compliance is not consent. Obedience is not belief. That's the gap between what's legal and what people still trust. If any one of this is landing for you, not emotionally, but recognitionally, that's the point of this show. Stick around, share it if it's helping you see more clearly. No pressure, just signal boost, clarity. When you find it, all right, it's time to turn it down and close it out for the day. Not because the world suddenly got calmer, but because you don't need to stay wired into the chaos to understand it. We live in a time where volume is mistake for truth. The loudest voice wins the moment, even when it loses the argument. Everything now arrives with urgency attached to headline, every clip, every opinion framed like a five alarm fire. And when everything is an emergency, nothing is. Here's the part most people never stop to notice. Constant stimulation doesn't make you informed. It makes you reactive. Reaction feels productive. It isn't. Thinking happens in quiet. Judgment happens in space. Wisdom has never competed well with noise. Historically, civilizations don't collapse because people disagree. They collapse because people lose the ability to pause between stimulus and response. That pause, that small gap where you decide instead of react, is where responsibility lives. And responsibility is out of style right now. So let's get practical. You don't need to solve the world tonight. You're not required to have to take on every story. And you are not more morally obligated to absorb every outrage cycle just because it found your screen. Most narratives are designed to pull you out of your own life and drop you into someone else's emotional script. Ask yourself this honestly. Did this information improve my understanding, or did it just spike my nervous system? Did it help me see more clearly, or did it tell me how I'm supposed to feel? If it's the second one, it can wait. Perspective isn't built by pilling one more inputs. It's built by filtering, and that means choosing what you don't engage with. Tonight, turning the volume down on the world and turning the focus back to the things that actually compound sleep, order, discipline, clear thinking, real conversations, work that produces something tangible. Those don't trend. They don't go viral, and they don't make anyone rich overnight. But they build adults, they build stability, they build people who don't panic when the noise spikes again, because it always does. The quiet truth beneath all of it, the world doesn't need you outraged. It needs you clear. Clear enough to notice patterns, clear enough to resist manipulation, and clear enough to act when it actually matters, not when you're told to. So tonight, step back, put down the phone before it puts ideas in your head you didn't choose. Give your brain time to settle into itself again. We'll turn it back up tomorrow. We always do. But for now, turn it down, reclaim your attention, and remember, the loudest voices fade, the clearest minds decide what comes next. This is The Turn, and I'm Robert Peel. And ladies and gentlemen, we normally have a few little cool graphics and some stuff that I try to do. However, my computer took a big bite yesterday and it's broken forever. So I had to start using another computer, and I'm getting myself all set up again. And I don't have all my stuff. So we will have more graphics and everything as the time goes on. We're now shooting every day. I'll see you tomorrow.